Hi, this is Dr. Graves. This is a YouTube tutorial to help you get through some of the calculations, basic statistics, particularly central tendency statistics associated with a couple of the assignments in the spatial analysis class, particularly the Lab 1 in class and the Lab 1C, the homework version. Doing descriptive statistics and mapping some of the data. This is the Excel part. And focus on the task at hand, which is how do we use Excel to do some of the statistics that the GIS may not be able to do. And so what you can do once you learn how to do a lot of this stuff is that if the GIS doesn't calculate things the way you want to, sometimes it's easier to open it in Excel, do it in Excel, and then re-import or reattach the file through a table join, and you will learn that later in the semester as well. We have just in part one exported a DBF file, .dbf file called state data. So we're going to open that up, and I'm going to look for it by clicking on the browse window, and I saved it in the ArcGIS folder, and there it is. But what you normally would want to do is to change this from all Excel files to DBF files. That will help ensure that you can find exactly what you're looking for. US state data, that's what we downloaded in the previous step. If you were doing the homework, it should be California County's DBF file, and you will replicate what we do in this tutorial on your own for California. So here we go. Here's the data that we're looking for. The first thing I want to point your attention to is the state Fips column here. Notice that there is this little very tiny triangle up in the upper left corner of each of those cells, and that is a warning, and it says, if you click in the warning, the number in this cell is formatted as text or preceded by an apostrophe. Normally that would be a problem, but as I mentioned before, Fips, state Fips, stands for State Federal Information Processing System, and so that's like a zip code. You should not be able to add those up because it doesn't make sense to add zip codes or FIP codes. One of the ways you can tell that that is being done properly is to highlight it, highlight several of the data, and look down here at this bottom tool ribbon, and it says count equals 12. That indicates that this is nominal or text or string data, and that the data is behaving as it is supposed to. Just the same should happen if we highlight the names of the states. And again, it's showing just a count because you can't take an average or a sum of nominal data. But if I highlight this column, white people, we get both an average, the count, and the sum. So that tells us that this data is numeric data. It is functioning as it should. This is, by the way, integer data, and this is sort of ratio data, and because it's got some fractional numbers after the decimal point. So this is population per square mile. It's a rate, and the same as well. But they're still numbers, and they're calculating in that fashion. So here's the other column of data you may be interested in. It is functioning, this object ID, as numbers, and normally we don't want that to happen. So one of the first tricks I'll show you is how to convert numbers that are functioning as numbers into text, string, or nominal data. So it doesn't function that way. So I'm going to highlight the data. I used Control, Shift, and the down arrow to do that. Click on Data, click on Text to Columns, click on Next, Next, and Text. And when I finish that, click, notice that these numbers all jump to the left. They're now left justified, but more importantly, what happens is that there's only a count. Now we can make things justify to the left by, I'm clicking on the home and forcing them to the left, but notice that they're still averaging and counting. We can even tell the Excel to change this to text, but that doesn't do anything. It's a completely worthless gesture in Excel. It's still telling us here that this data looks like text now, but it's not functioning like it. So that earlier trick that I showed you is the only way to do that. Okay, so on to doing some basic calculations in Excel. I'm going to put my cursor in the cell F2. There's the cell reference over there, F2, and then I'm going to click on View, and I'm going to split. That's also Alt-W-S for those of you who are Jedi and like to do things quickly. I Control arrow down to get to the bottom of that data, and I am going to leave at least one row of data blank. That's row 53. If I go back here in home and I just give it a pink, so I know, don't put any calculations in that row, because when you go to sort the data or change it around, it will assume that your calculations are data, not calculations. So here are the things that I'm going to have you calculate today. So over under here in sub-region column, column D, type in count, and then mode, median, mean, standard, deviation, coefficient of variation, skewness, and kurtosis. You can pause now while you catch up with that if you don't type as quickly as I do. And then we're going to begin to enter some formulas manually. You can also insert the formulas by going up here to Formula, that tab, and because we're mostly doing statistics, most of those functions, as they call them, are in under More, Statistical, and then we're looking for Count, so we could just scroll down and click Count. That's one way of doing it. So we'll do it this way first, and then I'll show you the faster way. So click Count, and then it's going to ask you, well, what do you want to, which values do you want to use? And actually it's recognizing, this is a nice new feature, that we want to use all the values in column F. So that's from column F2 to F53, and we click OK, and there we go. It's there, and that's the correct number. That there are 51 states in this instance because it's including Washington, D.C. If you press the F2 button, and that's function F2 on my keyboard, notice that it brings up the formula viewer, F2, and we sort of want that formula, but I would argue that the better version of this is F2 to F52, Notice that the blue box now does not include our sacred pink row that we don't want to put anything in. And if we hit enter, it still gives us the correct. So what you're going to do in the subsequent rows is to type in these formulas and include the data just the same, F2 to F52, and it gives us not applicable because in terms of mode there are no two states that have the same population, which is logical. I'm glad it did work that way. And then we want to type in median. I didn't even type all the way. I got halfway there. It suggested median. Then I hit tab and it filled out the left parentheses. I'm scrolling up, Control Shift, up arrow, and then just Shift down arrow to get F2 to F52 with the colon in the middle. This is next mean, but we don't use the word mean. It's average. And again, I could just type it in, F2 to colon F52 works well to do that. Whichever way you find fastest. Standard deviation, that's STD. And then we want to use the top of these, the first one, which is standard deviation P for population. So I'm going to, since it's highlighted, I just have to hit tab and then F2 to colon F52, and it gives us the standard deviation. The coefficient of variation is something that we have to calculate, and that is the standard deviation divided by the mean. So we have the standard deviation. I hit equals, that's standard deviation divided by the mean, which is just directly above it, and then I just press enter and it gives us a coefficient of variation of 1. That's not very helpful. So let's click on the Home tab and click on the Increase Decimal tool, and that gives us a coefficient variation of 1.11, which is a more helpful way of seeing that data. Next, we type in skewness, or we want to ask the skewness. So skew P is what we want because we're asking for all of the observations, not just a sample. So tab and then F2 colon F52, pretty quick right there. And that skewness is 3. We want to increase the decimal point a few so we have a better understanding of skewness. And then the last one is kurtosis. And gee, it didn't take much for it to figure it out. Kurtosis, highlight, and that says 9. So this kurtosis is now 8.7 or so, and that's almost everything. So here, all I'm doing is I highlighted, I'm copying, and I'm going to paste it all the way across to all of the cells that are below all of the columns, and then I have a massive table of those sorts of things. I'm going to show you one last trick. Go to File, go to Options, go to Add-ins. At the bottom, Manage Add-ins, click Go. Turn on Analysis Tool Pack, click OK. Notice in the Data tab, Data Analysis is now visible. Click on Data Analysis and click on Descriptive Statistics from the list. Click OK. It asks you, what would you like descriptive statistics for? Let's just ask for a few columns worth of data. You could do the whole table if you want. I highlighted the columns of data that I want, and I will just click, let's click Summary Statistics and then click OK. How did I forgot to click labels in the first row. Click OK, and boom, there I have in a new tab all of these data that I want, and that's a little faster than doing it manually, but I wanted you to see how to do it manually as well, and that ends this video tutorial.